You are live.
Alive?
Wouldn't it be awesome if I hit live and there was already a fucking viewer on here, sitting waiting for us? Like, motherfucker, you said 8 o'clock. It's 10 after. I've been sitting here waiting for you. Where the fuck you been?
I wonder what that would feel like. Viewers.
Okay, so welcome back to Revolutionary Roulette. I'm Rob Zielinski. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Zielinski, ZIELINSKI. Follow us on Instagram at Revolutionary Roulette or email the show at revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com. And I'm joined, as always, by Joshua Catlow.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You can find me on the socials at Facebook and Instagram at Joshua Patrick. Also, you can find me on Twitter arguing about why Matt Nagy can't possibly approach his Bears locker room, saying that Andy Dalton is the starter at Joshua Catlow. If you want to talk or rap sports with me.
There you go. So, again, this podcast, if you're fucking new, I don't know why you would be. You should have been with us from the beginning. But if you're just joining us, this is a podcast where we're discussing Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And today, we're starting a new chapter. This is going to be part 1 of chapter 6, titled The Intimately Oppressed. So far, the book and thus ourselves of this podcast have hardly mentioned half of the U.S. population. So let's do what we usually do when we start a new chapter and kick things off with a Zinn quote. It is possible.
Wicca, Zinn quote.
I'm definitely gonna have to cut that for a new drop. It is possible, reading standard histories, to forget half the population of the country. The explorers were men. The landholders and merchants, men. The political leaders, men. The military figures, men. The very invisibility of women, the overlooking of women, is a sign of their submerged status. In this invisibility, they were something like black slaves, and thus slave women faced a double oppression. So, yeah, first of all, I can't even imagine what it's like being a woman, let alone a black woman, let alone an enslaved black woman. So obviously, to say women were treated as inferiors would be like the understatement of the century. Even though their role as childbearers was supremely important, as it always has been, it wasn't enough for men to treat them as equals in this new so-called political democracy. Women were still viewed as things you can exploit, use as sex objects, use as personal servants, use as childbearer and teacher and discipliner of the man's children, of his children.
I was expecting Zinn to get a little overzealous and perhaps carried away with the the way you read the quote. Think men, blank, men.
Yep.
The women, men. Like, take it easy. Take it easy, Howard. I know you're just trying to be woke and shit, but there's pronouns now.
Oh my God, that was so good. Okay, so speaking of, this part especially is for the ladies. So Zinn goes on to describe earlier societies in America that seemed to treat women equally, or at least a lot more equal than the shitbag white folks who brought private property and civilization. So from Zinn, quote, in the Zuni tribes of the Southwest, for instance, extended families, large clans, were based on the woman whose husband came to live with her family. It was assumed that women owned the houses and the fields belonged to the clans, and the women had equal rights to what was produced. A woman was more secure because she was with her own family, and she could divorce the man when she wanted to, keeping their property. Women in the Plains Indian tribes of the Midwest did not have farming duties, but had a very important place in the tribe as healers, herbalists, and sometimes holy people who gave advice. When bands lost their male leaders, women would become chieftains. Women learned to shoot small bows, and they carried knives because among the Sioux, a woman was supposed to be able to defend herself against attack. So it would be now it would be an overstatement to say that women were viewed as equal to men in tribes across America, but damn it, they were respected.
Mm-hmm. It's almost as if in the Zuni tribe, however, they were more important because after marriage, they would go and live with the female's family and not the male's family. And they were looked on and respected as if not only equals, but kind of superior in a way, which is not unusual for tribe cultures, but women in any aspect of life whatsoever. And what I'm saying is there are superior women to men in every realm, facet, shape, form, or fashion of society. However, they never really get recognized as such, and that's problematic. And we've been dealing with that since the beginning of time. But in the Zuni culture, it was almost as like they were ahead of their time by 500 years, close to 500 years, and actually treated them like, hey, you're pushing all of us motherfuckers out from your below parts. Maybe we should probably respect the fact that none of us are breathing unless it's because of your gigglies down there. So, and they actually treated women as such, which is a beautiful thing. And wow, what a novel idea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even, we talk about modern times. I mean, there's still like this significant pay gap for women in this great capitalist system that we're living in. So obviously women have come a very long way in the way that they're viewed in society. I mean, even when you watch TV shows like Mad Men, where they're just like, slapping a secretary on the ass and saying, good job, toots, and all this other shit, like that, this stuff was happening like just, I mean, I'm sure it still happens today. Every single day that still happens with the, these boomers who don't know how to fucking act. But, these things were really prevalent in, just 50, 60 years ago.
And I mean, to be honest, it feels like women just got the right to vote probably in this election. And to take it back to tribal times, the tribes of the Plains, where the women had the prominent role of healer. Just think about how their dismay towards Western medicine was. Not that there was too much of it going on that early in history, outside of cocaine and whiskey use, but that was your usual forms of sedation. But just taking into the fact that women as healers in nature can actually be one of the best and most therapeutic and transcendent ways to heal mind, body, and spirit. So for just the women to have the role that they've unfortunately been thrown to by modern society as healers, as nurturers, they automatically had second nature to, and did that for their tribe mates and members. So not only were they meant to do that, but they're meant to do much greater things in life. And we're just now starting to realize these things hundreds of years after the fact.
Yeah. And obviously still some cultures, not so much, even now. So as you recall, the earliest settlements consisted mostly of white men. So back in 1619, the year of our Lord Jesus Christ,
Maria Christ.
such a good it just makes such good podcasting when you do stuff for the video.
Oh, sorry.
No, not you, both of us. Anyway, that was the general you. So the first, which was the first year black slaves arrived at Jamestown, 90 white females also arrived and were sold to settlers as wives, and they made beautiful babies and lived happily ever after. Not. They were indentured servants and treated like shit. Your
slaves are black. Not.
Yeah, they were, it was like a rainbow coalition of slaves. So, again, they were indentured servants. They were paid poorly, if at all, and the food they were offered sucked, and they had little to no privacy at all. They were mostly teenage girls too, and we know how all teens like their food and their privacy. So, it had to be extra brutal. And like the male indentured servants, they had to work to be the settler slave for up to 7 years. And this was just to pay for the boat ride to America. And again, these women servants, much like the men, lived with or near only the family that bought them. So there was no real chance of organized uprising. But because they were treated so poorly, the conflict that we always discuss was still there, and these women took part in the subtle or passive resistance and just did the least amount of work that they could possibly do without being caught and punished. And the owners just chalked it up to them being dumb and lazy.
Right. One of the things that you were mentioning is that the women lived with the families, but they were also expected to intertwine with the family, the mistresses, the side pieces, and still keep their mouths shut, even though there was side piece. Sometimes, and this is in the book, sometimes they were a side piece to a side piece. He didn't use those words, obviously, but he broke it down that sometimes they were not the offspring, but told to be subservient to the mistress. So it's like when you were saying, imagine how teenagers want their privacy. They're like, oh my God, can you believe this? This bitch got her nails done, and I'm over here in the corner with the washboard and the fucking tree stump trying to clean the laundry from this shit bag. Yeah. And even his wife and his girlfriend gets to go out.
Right. Yeah. And it makes me think of Office Space with the fucking TPS reports where he's like, I have 7 bosses.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, you could get sold to a family, but, it's the husband, the wife, and as you so eloquently put it, side pieces. Basically, they were servants to anybody and everybody in the family that, was actually family and not a slave or another indentured servant.
The only promise they had of hope was that they signed the indentured servant contracts, and they had the prospect of becoming free after 7 years, after their mental capacity has completely been broke down and tarnished, and their lady parts ravished by these horrible men that didn't care that they were not even age of consent wasn't even a thing back then. They were essentially used for the male's pleasure at whatever time or age, even though they knew it was wrong. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the women had a small glimmer of hope. White women, for the most part, in the indentured servant role, had a small glimmer of hope of this all ending 7 years from when they got shipped over.
Right. So just a quick reminder, if you like the show and want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/revolutionary roulette and join for as little as $5 a month. Again, patreon.com/revolutionary roulette. And just to kind of segue to what you were saying, just a quick note that this particular chapter is chock full of devastating individual stories, ranging from rebellious girls being publicly corrected to girls who were constantly being stalked by their owners, to enslaved black women on the ships to America giving birth while still chained to corpses because the sailors were too inebriated or indifferent to let them have any kind of dignity during childbirth. So if you're interested in details like that and want to get just a better experience and perspective, and you're listening to this podcast, so you probably are, it's just another reason to pick up the actual book or listen to the audiobook for yourself.
In one of the ways that the women were described, I don't think we hit it in your writings, but quickly, you were saying how women were forced to give birth in the slave quarters underneath the boat, in which were anything but Ramada Inn. Oftentimes there would be 18-inch gaps where women would have to lay on their backs, or if they were small enough on their size, in the spoon position with somebody else chained to them. Mm-hmm. And what Rob referred to earlier, this is a rather difficult thing to fathom. So if you have a squeamish stomach, pause it for 5 seconds. But there were a time where he said that the boat captains would be so wrecked on rum that he would come down, find women given birth, chained up to dead people, and then oftentimes neglect the child as well. So that just goes to show you that they couldn't even take care of people as a product and had no pride or in ownership or craftsmanship or whatever kind of ship you want to sail in that time. We'll get to another couple good facts about ships later in the episode, I believe. But that just goes to show you that white people, even back in the 1619s, still had an aversion to the rum instead of actually handling their business.
Right.
Horrible facts, but facts they are nonetheless.
And I would also suggest, again, if you don't have a squeamish stomach, there are like depictions of what it would be like, pictures, art of the slave quarters below deck, and to actually see the images, it's harrowing to say the least. So now, if you were thinking that free white women must have had it good, think again. Obviously, they did have it as bad as white indentured women, or start again. Obviously, because fucking now I'm just gonna keep thinking about the fucking highlighter here.
Sorry, I put it away.
I use it to like.
That's how you dago your way through the podcast. It's just like head to me, schools, they get the beat tonight. Oh my goodness, black knots,
spaghetti. Obviously, they didn't have it as bad as white indentured women or enslaved black women, but they faced their own adversities. the book goes into detail, but the bottom line is women were saddled with draconian laws and ideas that were brought over from England by settlers, which were influenced by Christian teachings. So
Jesus in the house.
So seriously, it was actual law in a document called the Laws Resolutions of Women's Rights, which is ironic because it just goes on to detail how women have no rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Am I right? No.
Especially once they were married. So women's identities basically ceased to exist once they were married. Her companion is now her master, and all the law really says is that a man can rape his wife because he owns her, but he can't kill her or cause her any permanent injuries. So there's your Puritan bullshit law right there.
I mean, let's face it. A lot of men feel that way to this day because they were brought up in Southern Christian, Southern Baptist. Sorry, I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just speaking the truth. My aunt is an example of someone who's like a women should be in the kitchen and, you know, taking care of the family type thing. And there's it's not like we're throwing a bunch of bullshit out here that you can't actually fathom. It happens. I mean, even and it's mostly in them southern, more religious general areas in which it happens, but it's still happening to this day.
That's right. So obviously, since married women were property themselves, they couldn't own anything. Any money she made from her labor, that's all hubby's too. And if you're not married, don't you dare have a baby out of wedlock. That's a crime. Well, it's not a crime for the man who knocked her up. He gets high fives and all the protection from the law, but for the woman, it's a crime, and they actually had to appear before the court as they were arraigned and charged with bastardy, where they would be sentenced to heavy fines. So again, we see this damn poor tax implemented, and this time it's on single mothers. So it's like, don't you think a single mom would need money to care for her children and not be a burden on the township? No, let's make her pay everything she has to cover heavy fines and use that money to pay salaries of wealthy judges or whatever the fuck.
Right. Yeah, it's one of them instances where they also spoke in the book saying that there was certain cases that women were imprisoned for days on end until they were punished and felt by the prison supervisors, or I don't know if they were called guards back then per se, but the prison overseers, that they were punished for days on end until they felt that they actually understood their role and got to back to the air quotes way of living properly in the eye of the male beholder. So things are messed up, and that's just an even more in-depth look at just how fucked up things were.
Yep. And of course, as always, there was propaganda to indoctrinate both men and women. A popular periodical that circulated in both England and America called The Spectator described the position of the father in a family as, quote, "Nothing is more gratifying to the mind of the man than power or dominion. And as I am the father of a family, I am perpetually taken up in giving out orders, in prescribing duties, in hearing parties, in administering justice, and in distributing rewards and punishments. In short, sir, I look upon my family as a patriarchal sovereignty in which I am myself both king and priest. The level of mental masturbating going on in that piece and stroking the fragile egos of men is fucking pathetic. And even Zinn minces no words and says, no wonder that the Puritan New England carried over this subjection of women. It's so fucking gross.
It is. We've never been the best free thinkers, speaking in blanket statements of men in general. Even the ones that were considered the greatest of minds are still some of the most bastardos that we've ever had the pleasure of meeting. So it's one of them things where you take the good with the bad because they were so different times. However, the sense of right and wrong never was of utmost responsibility in the mind of the male overseers and beholders, or males in general.
Yeah. So, and then there was the indoctrination of young girls. And this one, Jesus Christ, it was a bestseller published in London and widely read in the 1700s, called Advice to a Daughter.
Goodbye.
You must first lay it down for a foundation in general, that there is inequality in sexes, and that for the better economy of the world, the men who were to be the lawgivers had the larger share of reason bestowed upon them, by which means your sex is the better prepared for the compliance that is necessary for the performance of those duties which seem to be most properly assigned to it. Your sex wanteth our reason for your conduct, and our strength for your protection. Ours wanteth your gentleness to soften and to entertain us.
You know what this sounds like to me, Rob? It sounds like a Macbethian R. Kelly song. That's how it sounds. Like it's read in the words of R. Kelly, like, yo, sex girl is always gonna have to be subservient. And fall in line when I say some shit. Because you're trapped in the closet.
So, I mean, it's rough because I mean we're talking about, again, indoctrination of young girls, and this shit was super popular, and it reminds me of like modern day sort of chastity balls that they have for young girls, and they say I love my daddy, and I'm not going to have sex until I get married, and it's going to be to some other fucking micro penis jerk. I don't know. So
what I think what you're trying to say is that you wish that we knew a sketch artist so we could have someone jot out a full-on picture of what Jeffrey Epstein's ancestors look like, and then we could put them on flagpoles, because that sounds like right up his alley, exactly what we just read. So
brutal. So for any women listeners out there, please give us feedback. This is
Run, bitch, get some help.
Yeah, we need some help. This is our first crack at this chapter. Again, the intimately oppressed, discussing women, and kind of cutting it short a little bit, and it's mostly because I wanted to try to do the due diligence that it deserves for some of the badass women in the book, like Anne Hutchison and Julia Spruill. So I want to give it a little more time, focus in on them, some of the heroes of the time. But I know we weren't perfect tonight. So, and we're a couple of dumbass white cis men. So if there's any women out there who have any, let's say constructive, constructive criticism or not, if you want to fucking, rip us a new one,
just
go ahead.
Shoot from the hip or the tit, whatever.
And go ahead and, just email the show revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com or slide in Josh's DMs, whatever the fuck you want to do. So, I mean, I'm kind of, that's all I have for the week. I mean, if you want, we can just talk about how the Supreme Court found that the federal eviction moratorium was unconstitutional. Maybe having like 9 of the fucking, some of the oldest people on the planet making decisions for young folks, and these are people who go to charities and they're paying fucking $5,000 a plate, shit like that. Like they're just completely out of touch with the world. Maybe a Supreme Court shouldn't exist. Maybe a presidency shouldn't exist. Like
it's about who's a part of said courts that are. There's no diversity, and the one black dude in there is the whitest man of the whole fucking clan, and that's exactly what they are. They're a clan. RGB left and was replaced by nobody of brown skin. So it's not so much about the. Look, I hate the fucking judicial system as much as the next person. I've been fighting it pretty much my whole life. However, when the body is made up of people that are halfly dead bodies, it's probably going to be problematic. And also, the age of which you should be able to serve on the Supreme Court needs to be reflected and needs to be changed. You shouldn't be allowed to serve past 70. Because you tend to be more out of touch and stuck with your ways. We need progressive thinkers in this seat or in those seats, those 12 seats specifically. And most of the time, those seats are filled with people that are heavily backed by what's the word I'm looking for here?
Fucking corporations.
Yeah, corporations is what I meant, but there's a specific word: lobbyists.
Lobbyists. Yeah, sure.
Backed by lobbyists and unable to do their job with the dignity of which one in a court system should, by factual information being judged instead of PepsiCo throwing millions of dollars at certain problems and just having you choose on their behalf. But these are all things that the pessimist in me likely will never see change. But these are one of the reasons why we preach starting government at the structural level instead of treating politics as it's a once every 4-year thing. So there's more than one vote to be had. We know that the system's not perfect. We know that no matter what we vote in certain instances, there's still going to be problems. And by problems, I'm talking copious, large mass hysteria-inducing problems. But at least when you start from the ground up, you have the opportunity for hope. And hope is, if not the best thing in the world, it's one of the best things in the world, because you get to live off of an idea of a different or a new promise of tomorrow. So there's a lot of different things that need to change in our judicial system, but I think diversity and age are the two most prevalent.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, the age thing for sure. There definitely ought to be term limits. You shouldn't be appointed by whoever just happens to be president that year.
I like beer.
And then you get to stay there for the rest of your life, or until you want to retire or whatever. And the diversity thing, it would be nice. But we got Clarence Thomas on there, and he, of course,
his middle name's White Man.
So he
a hoe.
He's definitely a hoe. He was helped by Joseph Robinette Biden to get on the Supreme Court when Ice Cream Joe was a senator. He
Delaware, correct?
He led the committee that was, however you say it, like fucking. I'm gonna have to cut all this shit out. But what the fuck? What do you call it? Like when they do like the confirmation hearings?
Gotcha.
I want to say he was like the leader of the committee for that, and yeah. So it's like the diversity part of it doesn't really matter. It's like that's just identity politics, right? Because like again, Biden became president. And he appointed a black man as the Secretary of Defense. But motherfucker is on the board of Raytheon, who makes all the fucking, weapons along with, Honeywell and Boeing and the rest of them. But just because he's a black man doesn't mean he's, a leftist. Like he's a fucking Republican and made his money selling weapons to contractors and everything else that's bad with doing that kind of fucking job. So
it reminds me of a scene from The Wire in which they move all. Have you watched that?
No, I tried, and I've talked to so many people and they're like, well, if you just get through the first 2 seasons, it gets really good after that. I'm like, bitch, no, like you don't merit my attention after the first.
Wow. I think season 2 is not my habit, but to need to get through season 1 is, in my opinion, not necessary. But we're not talking television shows here, but that's shocking to me that you had a difficulty getting through season 1 because it's amazing. But that's just both of our opinions. What I'm saying is there's a part in The Wire where they move all of the general population of the projects, crack users, drug dealers, gangbangers, etc., to one central location to try and commit or to try and keep crime in a centralized location so people can live their lives around it without problem.
Okay.
And in that season, one of the names for the crack in which they were selling was WMD. We got that WMD, weapons of mass destruction.
Yep.
So it's like I'm sitting here thinking about homeboy that's got the prestigious position of sweetening his wallet as defense secretary, which is what Donald Rumsfeld held for the Bush administration under Cheney. And it's like, these motherfuckers are puppet masters for people that slang metal for a living. It's like the 3 greatest exports for the United States is war, weapons, and women. Yeah. Let that sink in. And that's, once again, just my opinion. But the way that women are snatched up and sold across as sex slaves is beyond fucked up. We're not talking about selling lettuce to China or whatever the fucking farmers do in the central part of this country. We sell and make our money on things that ruin and end lives. We don't have any honest exports that are considered to be great bringers of wealth to this country. And even if they were, they'd be snatched up and put in somebody else's pocket before they ever had the opportunity to get back into the community. Mm-hmm. So it's disturbing that you can throw women in there as an export for the United States, but come on now.
Well, I'm curious. I've never really thought about it, and I guess this goes well with the chapter recovery. I mean, so where are you getting this information from specifically, or like what source, or
I guess the things that you read on like Reuters is one of the places where I tend to get a lot of my information. I trust them. I feel like they do vetting to a degree in which I would deem acceptable. And then you always have these stories of CNN. There's documentaries on Netflix about women, sex slaves, being sold in and brought out to different countries, and stolen as young women, as from like 7, 8 and lower, and trained and broken down into living these kind of lives with other people. So maybe I'm taking it a step too far by saying they're their third biggest export, but it's like, it doesn't seem that we are doing enough to protect the ones that are being snatched and grabbed, to keep them with their families. And that, in my opinion, is everybody's opinion for the most part, is an awful thing. I drive for a living, so every day I say a specific and a very special motherfucker for the missing person thing that comes up on the highway signs. And sometimes it's multiple different vehicles and multiple different cars. And I'm not saying each one of them are being stolen by somebody, sold into sex trafficking, etc., etc. But I'm assuming that it's not all just family matters where dads or moms are running off with their children. But just by some of the documentaries that I've watched, it's a stunning, and I'm drawing a blank on it too, for the CNN. It's hosted by an Asian woman. It's a documentary on Netflix. I am blanking on the name, so I apologize. But if you wanted to look it up, go to your documentary section, scroll through, and that should be able to help you find what I'm speaking of.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's definitely, that was the only thing was that threw me for a loop, was like the third, the third.
Well, weapons of war go hand in hand, and then when we're talking about actual human beings, we saw what happened with Jeffrey. Now, obviously, they were just being exported to an island of which he owned. But if it's as easy as for him to do that for 30, 40 years, do we really think that these kids that go missing, that it would be such a vision of grandeur that they're being sold to other countries? And once again, I'm being presumptuous by saying it's America's third biggest export. That's not factual. That's not an actual number. But what I'm saying is that we're so fucking corrupt. We make our money off of killing people. We make our money off of instruments that kill people, and then we make our money off of human beings, almost as if we were living in 1618.
Right.
So that's where I was trying to go with it.
Okay, just making sure, and I'll have to check that out.
No, I appreciate you clarifying. We don't want to spit nonsense, and I understand that, and that's what a good host would do. So we're just not spewing incoherent bullshit. But
yeah, and I was worried I was losing you to QAnon for a second. You were
that's another great documentary on HBO. The rise and meteoric failure of these numbskulled people that actually believed into it. It's like when you find out who supposedly is behind the QAnon phenomenon, at least according to the HBO documentaries, which once again do some pretty good venting. You can't just throw bullshit out there and hope it sticks to a wall. But it's like another good one.
QAnoners do.
Exactly. It's another one that you should check out. It's disturbing that so many people fall in line to something that is so outlandishly crude and unusual.
I mean, there was a dude who fucking killed his family because like QAnon had him thinking his kids had lizard blood or some shit, and it's just like it's the most fucking pathetic but sad thing I've ever fucking heard of. Like,
yeah, definitely related to Charlie Sheen.
All right. Well, that's all I really have. Maybe we'll throw together another Off the Rails episode in a week or so, and maybe touch on Afghanistan or something like that. But I know we got to get to bed. So
if you take anything away from this episode, America, you fucks, take away the fact that you got to protect your neck. Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang.
And as usual, at the risk of sounding eloquent, let's general strike.
General strike.